I'm live. There. It's very unusual, this, isn't it? You have to watch the countdown and then it tells you you're live and you're live. How you doing? It's September the 11th, 2018. It's Tuesday. And enlightened. Rita, how are you? I said the weather shouldn't or couldn't dampen my spirits. In fact, it's not bad, Rita. When I was out running earlier this morning, I got a soaking. And it was miserable, but it's brightened up considerably, as you can probably see from the window there. So it isn't as bad in Manchester today as it has been overnight. Anyway, thanks for joining me. This might be something that might grow into something. I'm going to do this every day, every show day at 2 p.m. anyway. I'll tell you who's coming on the program and what they're likely to talk about. And what if I did this? Is that better? I'll tell you what they're likely to be talking about, who they are, and that's pretty much it, really. And I might have one or two little snippets from the news today as well. So hi to Sam and to Helen and to Cocabelle there, to Ricky and to Nathan and to anybody else. They scroll up on the page there very quickly, so I can't actually see all of them. And to Jock. How you doing, Jock? It's a United hoodie. Right. Do you know what I said yesterday? That I wouldn't be talking about September the 11th today. I'm not going to talk about it in terms of debunking it, which is something I've attempted to do with the help of many guests over the years, probably several thousand times. But I will just briefly talk about this day 17 years ago in terms of what it means to me personally. Now, this might bore the bejesus out of you if you've heard the story before, or if you're a long time listener to the program, you will have heard it before. But I was working for WLR-FM in Waterford in Ireland on September the 11th, 2001, which was a Tuesday. It's quite remarkable, actually, because as I speak with you now, it's 1:01, and it was all happening in New York City and in DC, wasn't it? Round about this time exactly. I think it was 9:15 a.m. Eastern Time, New York, when the first plane hit, I think, which we didn't see live. We saw the second one hit live. So that's not far off now, really. So about 15 minutes ago, back in 2001, it all began in New York City. And I was producing a current affairs radio show at the time called Daisha AM, which endures today in Waterford. And WLR-FM is a very successful, hugely successful commercial radio station in Ireland. And I was very lucky that I was taken in by the station when I was relatively young. I've talked about this before. I presented the graveyard music shows for some time. And eventually, because I got on very well with the head of programs, who also presented the mid-morning talk show, a man called Billy McCarthy, who's no longer with us. Billy passed away about 18 months ago. They gave me the job of producing the content for the top-rated, basically the flagship show for the station, the mid-morning talk show, which aired every weekday between 10 and 12. And that's, how I got into it, having my big break, really. And I was at that job for a year and a half, 2 years before September the 11th. So again, I'm not going to, go on and on here debunking the events of September the 11th, because it's been done so many times. And like I said on yesterday's radio show, I don't know anybody really, even those who ordinarily think we're all a bunch of tinfoil hat wearers. Most of the ones who think we're crazy when we talk about geoengineering, we're crazy when we talk about vaccines and autism and Gardasil and all of that. They don't think it's crazy when you say that September the 11th was a pack of lies. What I vividly remember about that day was two things I remember. The first one being earlier that morning, around about 7 o'clock in the morning. Excuse me, I've been eating and I didn't brush my teeth before I came to speak to you. How dare I? Earlier that morning, around about 7 p.m., 7:30, I would have been having a meeting with my presenter. And I would have been saying to him, listen, this is what we're going to do this morning. Because I obviously would have arranged the show. I came up with the ideas for the show. I came up with the guests for the show. And then I would give my presenter homework for him to do while he's having his breakfast. He would be reading the papers anyway. And then we would go and do the live show at 10 o'clock. I would participate in the live show. I would do interviews sometimes, and so on, so on, so on. But I was the producer. I was effectively running that show. So we were talking about Tuesday's show, September the 11th, 2001. And I do remember vividly, because it's a commercial radio station in a city, we wouldn't often have talked about geopolitical events. I'm not saying we never did, but we wouldn't often have been speaking about news that was making news in America. But that particular morning, I remember Billy and myself having having a discussion about something the US Defense Secretary had said the previous day. Now, you'll know this. Donald Rumsfeld gave a press conference on the Monday, and he announced that the Pentagon had effectively lost $2.3 trillion. And Rumsfeld said it in the same spirit as if he'd lost these fucking keys. We lost $2.3 trillion. We can't account for it. Anyway, moving on. So I do remember talking about that morning, thinking, well, as far as corruption goes, have you ever heard figures like that bandied around? But we didn't cover it. What we did say to one another, Billy as a very seasoned presenter, a very experienced journalist and a brilliant journalist. God have mercy on him. If there is a God, rest in peace. Billy did say at the time, who announces that stuff on a Monday? That's the sort of shit that you admit to doing on a Friday, and you hope then that over the weekend it gets lost somehow, and that on Monday, maybe, you just move on. The following Monday, that is. But we did nothing about it. So we did Tuesday's program. It would have been a regular talk program. We would have talked about politics. We would have talked about human interest. And then we went to lunch. Now, that particular day, we went to lunch together, which was unusual. He ordinarily did his own thing for lunch, and I did my own thing. We wouldn't have lunched together very often, but we did lunch together that day. We went to a hotel just around the corner. They had a special on. Everybody loves a special. 2 for the price of 1, something, whatever it was anyway. When we came back about 10 minutes to 2, it was all kicking off. And there was a man, I can't remember his name. I can remember his name, but I don't know if it was him. One of the news presenters anyway said, you better come in here. It's crazy what's happening in New York City. And at that stage, they were reporting on the first plane hitting. And a couple of minutes later, give or take, I've not got the timings 100% right here, the second plane hit, and this was covered live. And I think we probably would have been watching Sky News. So at that stage, press releases and stuff, press releases and information was coming through independent radio news, IRN. We would have also be getting stuff coming off the fax. Now, this would have been fax back then. We would have had faxes coming in from Associated Press and Reuters and stuff like that. So it was decided that this was very serious. This is deadly serious. And it was made clear to us that the United States was under attack. So what we did was we spoke to the lunchtime presenter, and we spoke to the drive time presenter who was waiting in the wings to pick up the baton at 3 p.m. And we said to those guys, listen, we're going to take you off the air today, and we're going to have to cover this because it's beyond massive, it's huge. So that's what we did. And one of the things I do remember about that day was there was a great sense of shock at what was happening and what we were being told was happening. That basically men were flying planes full of people into buildings and killing them, and that these men were Islamic terrorists. There was also, as much as the shock, there was also a great sense of camaraderie. And presenters and the news team, everybody clubbed together in terms of, well, who do we know in New York City? Who do we know in Washington, D.C.? Let's help Richie. I was 26 at the time. I had a fairly good contact book by then, but I didn't know too many people in New York. And my colleagues, many of whom were older than me, were amazing. They were amazing. You know, well, I know a guy, Richie, in New York, and he used to work at City Hall. And I know a woman, Richie, and she's a well-known journalist there. She writes for one of the dailies. I've got a number for her. Let's get her on. And it turned out, and I'm not bragging now, because it wasn't really my doing, so I'm not bragging. But I couldn't imagine. I mean, I look back at the coverage of it. We had more in terms of credible, you know, fairly well-known journalists and commentators from New York City. We had more, and we had access that even the likes of Sky News and others were struggling to get. And I'll never forget, one of our presenters knew a man called Peter Franklin, who I've become very good friends with over the years. Peter Franklin is the Gabby Cabbie. He's a famous tour guide in New York City. If you ever go to New York City, you got to get a tour from Peter Franklin in his yellow cab. He's an absolute legend. Former Marine is Peter. And his sons and daughter, they all went into the army. He's not political at all. He's Peter. He's just a lovely fella. And we got Peter on the phone live from New York City, and he was passing the phone to people who'd come from the general area of the buildings, World Trade Center 1, the Tower 1, and all the rest of it. And they were coming live on the line to this radio channel, this program in Waterford. And they were telling us what's going on, describing it vividly. You know, the dust cloud, the fear, the panic, and everything else. So that's what I was doing 17 years ago. I was live on the radio, running in and out of a studio, talking to my presenter and introducing him to men and women that were in New York and that had seen something or could put us in touch with somebody who knew something. And I think we went off here about 7 p.m. that evening. We took it up again the following day. And the next few days were really, we were kind of basically just doing what every other news outlet was doing. We were telling our listeners that Osama bin Laden did it. That's what we were doing. Not great now when you look back at it. I was young. Billy had more experience than me, but I don't blame him either, to be honest. It was the culture that news talk, current affairs talk radio, it was the culture. It was how we existed. We got information from other sources, and those sources weren't questioned. And we read what those sources gave us as fact. So we were being told that a man in a cave in Afghanistan who had been involved in previous terrorist attacks, who was a member of Al-Qaeda, we were told that he orchestrated this and that all these hijackers came into the country and they were in sleeper cells and they learned how to fly planes and all the rest of it. And we just reported it. And that's all we did. Like everybody else, we never challenged any of this stuff, which it still is a bit embarrassing to me. I could hide behind the, well, I wasn't that experienced and I was 26 years of age, but holy fucking shit, really, you know. Some of the stuff we were being told that we were regurgitating, it's stuff that really, even with the best will in the world, even with the greatest excuses in the world, we should have been challenging it. We should have challenged it, but we didn't challenge it. I don't think we challenged when Muhammad Atta's passport was found in the rubble. I don't think any of us went, really? Yeah, they've got to be effing, why say effing now? They've got to be fucking shitting us, right? The passport? And we didn't. We just reported it. And I remember in Waterford City, speaking to people who'd been on aeroplanes when the planes were, because they were grounded for a couple of days, but when planes were allowed to take off again all over the world, I was meeting people who were getting on planes and they were terrified. And a few weeks later, a friend of mine who will remain nameless, he went to the Canary Islands for, you know, a mid-autumn break. And when he came back, he said he was on the plane and there was a man sitting in front of him and the man had a turban on. And he said that they were cacking themselves all the way from the Canaries to Dublin Airport. And they were all sitting behind this guy, waiting to pounce, right? Because he might have been a terrorist. The guy was probably a Sikh, probably. But that was the madness of it. And that's what we did. That's what I did on the day. And it was only a year and a half later that I read some books I've mentioned before. The Alice in Wonderland book written by David Icke was something that was given to me as a present. I knew about David Icke and the work he'd been doing, had no feelings about him either way, one way or the other. But I read that book. I then began to hear stories about academics like Kevin Barrett and Jim Fetzer going on to American network news, Fox News, and challenging the hosts and saying that this is possibly a whole load of bollocks. I remember watching Loose Change, written by and produced and presented by Dylan Avery and Corey Rowe, which they might have got some things wrong. Maybe they didn't, I don't know. But they did a great job of ridiculing the official version of events. I began to look around myself. I saw that the author of the 9/11 Commission report, the chairman, a guy called Thomas Keane, actually wrote a book saying that it was all a load of bollocks. His own report. And that's what he said. That's what he said, Thomas Keane. He said it was set up to fail. That's a quote. It failed. I remember reading about Mary. Do you remember Mary? The New Jersey housewife who filmed the dancing Israelis, these fucking yo-yos who were filming the towers, laughing. They had a white van, these 5 guys. Do you remember? They were later arrested by the US police and then it was all just brushed under the carpet. Why were they filming it? Why were they set up probably before it happened? Well, they had some sort of insider knowledge that it was going to happen, of course. All this stuff. And then you begin to think, Christ, how stupid was I to believe that a man in a cave in the Tora Bora Mountains did it or trained some guys to do it. And then you find out that he actually died only several weeks after September the 11th itself. And not only that, but he was a CIA asset and he had been dying for years. In fact, he'd been on dialysis and all the rest of it. We could have found some of this stuff out in the mainstream media. But do you know what? We weren't shills. We weren't evil. We weren't neocon Zionists. We were just lazy. We were conditioned. We were conditioned to believe that when Reuters, when Associated Press, when AFP send you down the fax line a piece of paper and something is claimed to be true, well, we just reported it. Must be true. I mean, in Waterford City or in Cork City or in Dublin or in Manchester, Nottingham, London, what can you do? You can't investigate it. You can't go over there with a team. You don't have the money, right? You don't have the money. You don't have the resources. Well, I'm going to go over there. And that's how the news works. And it works even more like that today. Commercial news outlets all over the world take as fact decrees. It's like papal decrees from these gigantic bureaus, right? They put it into their own language and they read it out as if it is totally true. And some years ago, when I used to do a bit of media training for City and Guilds, I used to ask the students all the time to read newspaper articles. Any article. It might be some piece of shite about a reality TV show, or it might be a news article about crime, or it might be an article about politics. And I would ask them to consider who wrote that article. Where did he or she get her or his information from? What was their motivation in writing the article? What did they want to do? What did they want to achieve? Right? Is there another side of that argument? Has it been presented by this publication? So that's where I was 17 years ago, around about this time, running around like a headless chicken. And then later on, 2-3 years later, regretting the whole thing and thinking, how could I have been so naive to buy into it? You know? Luckily enough, I've met people over the years, pilots, not just the wonderful men and women of pilots for 9/11 Truth, but other pilots. I met an Aer Lingus pilot in Spain who taught me 2 very interesting things. First thing he told me was about a UFO experience he had, which I've mentioned on the show before. Crazy thing happened to him in the air. Tell you about that another time. The second thing he told me in Spain, in Caroline's bar, my better half's bar at the time, was I said to him, could Hani Hanjuar have executed those aerobatics in descending towards the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and the 40-year experienced pilot who flew heavy, massive 747s from Dublin to JFK Airport. Do you know what he said? Like, fuck, he could have done it. No pilot could have executed the flight path that Hani Hanjuar was supposed to have executed when he descended over DC and crashed into the Pentagon. It's all fucking bollocks, all of it. Right. But I don't want to talk about it anymore in terms of talking about how it happened, because I don't know how it happened. Energy weapons. Yeah, why not? I don't know. It's plausible enough. You can't prove that to people, though, can you? You can say, yeah, maybe energy weapons, yeah. We have people arguing over whether there was no planes involved, and I just can't be arsed with it. The fact is, it was sold as the greatest pack of lies ever sold, at least in the 21st century to date. It's a massive lie. And it was carried out to serve a number of agendas, including the agenda to wreck, destroy, and plunder democracies, or at least not democracies, but countries not in the control of the banking cartels. Wreck those countries on behalf of France, Israel, of course, the United Kingdom and the United States, so that you could supplant your own democracy there. That was one of the things. To roll out a surveillance program, the likes of which people never thought was possible, the Patriot Act and everything else that came with it. It was multifaceted, their reasons for doing it. They did it. The security agencies, the intelligence agencies of the United States, and possibly of Israel, and possibly of France, were involved in staging and carrying it out. We know that. How they did it, it's important, I suppose. Of course it's important. I don't want to diminish or try to diminish it's important, but I just can't be arsed with it, arguing over it. There were planes and they were loaded with bombs. The elevators were being renovated and people put demolition-type charges into the building. That's what Richard Gage and the architects believe. And I like Richard Gage and the architects. I like all of these people. Who knows how they did it, but they did it. And there you are. You know, it's astonishing. 17 years later. I used to have hair back then. I had hair. Back in 2001, I would have been 26. And so it was kind of life-changing, not in the very short term, but in the long term, it was a life-changing thing for me, because I began to question what it was that I was doing every time I went on air. Every time I produced a program, what am I doing really? Am I really asking questions, or am I just regurgitating a narrative? And through the course of my commercial media career, I was regurgitating a narrative. And that's it. So look, 25 minutes there of you could have done without that. Let me tell you who's coming up on the program tonight. Not that I need to, I just don't want to make a mistake here. I welcome back Mark Collett to the program. Mark is I would call Mark a political activist. He calls himself a political activist. He has a very interesting program on YouTube. And he wrote a book called The Fall of Western Man, which is available at thefallofwesternman.com. It's available for anybody to read. A very interesting man is Mark. And we're going to talk along the lines of this theme about the rise of the far right, which I got into with Dean Henderson on last night's program. I want to get Mark's perspective on that, because Mark would be, I suppose Mark would describe himself as an alt-right commentator, political activist. So I want to get into that with him, and we'll do that. And I'm really looking forward to speaking to, later on in the program, a man called Martin Paul. Now, Martin is a molecular bioscientist, a PhD at Washington State University. He's a professor emeritus of biochemistry and basic medical sciences. I'm looking at his website right there. And what's he going to talk about? Well, for years, he's been trying to raise the alarm about the dangers of non-ionizing radiation, microwaves, pulses, EMFs. And he's an academic, and he's a system man. And he's peer-reviewed and all of that. And he's saying there's something very, very, very serious about the use of the coming use of 5G technology. It's deadly. And we don't often get system folks. I hope I'm not insulting him by calling him a system man. But he is. And he's going to talk about why he believes what it is he believes, the science behind it, and what we can expect when, you know, what are the human health implications of being surrounded by antennae that are pumping out this radiation when 5G is up and running. So it's going to be an interesting show tonight, and that's really I've really not got much more to say. I've been rambling on for 27 and a half minutes here. My great friend and colleague, partner in crime there, I see Jean-Anne Crowley has jumped into the chat room there. How you doing, Jean? I hope you're better. By the way, I know you've had a bit of a chesty old cough and the old lurgy of late. I hope you're well. And to everybody else who's put a little note there, thanks for doing that. So I'm going to go and get my opening salvo ready. Some interesting things to talk about in the news roundup. And Mark Collett on the alt-right rise in Sweden, Poland, Hungary, here maybe, and much more. And Dr. Martin Paul, PhD, Washington State University, molecular biologist, that's right. He's going to talk about why we should be very concerned about 5G and non-ionizing radiation. I will ask him to explain what the hell non-ionizing radiation is and how you can avoid coming into contact with it when he talks to me later on. So that's the end of this mini stream. I'll see you at 5 then, richieallen.co.uk. That's richieallen.co.uk. We're on triggerwarning.tv, and you should download Cogent Radio as an app. It's on TuneIn Radio as well, the biggest radio app in the world, TuneIn Radio, and it's 5 p.m. till 7, at those avenues. So until 5, I'll see you later. I've got to run. Bye for now.